The topic that I will be discussing is John B. Watson and the role that he played in behaviorism. Watson was first introduced in Module 1. He's considered to be one of the pioneering psychologists. Watson was born in January of 1878 and died in September of 1958. He graduated in 1903. Not much later, he became a professor in psychology for the University of Chicago. In 1908, he decided to become a professor at Johns Hopkins University. This was a great opportunity because Watson was able to start a laboratory in order to conduct his own research. In 1913, he made his first claim that psychology is the science of human behavior. His debut article on the subject was called "Psychology as a Behaviorist Views It." In his lab, he was able to conduct experiments on animals. Just 1 year later, he debuted his first considerable piece of work called "Behavior: An Introduction to Comparative Psychology." This piece of work fought that animals should be used in psychological studies. His main form of experimentation was using conditioned responses. For those who aren't already aware, classical conditioning is when a new behavior is formed through the process of association. This is done by linking two stimuli together. I will explain further how Watson used classical conditioning in his most famous experiment. Quickly enough, he decided to research further into infant studies. Soon after, his most famous experiment came about, which is the Little Albert experiment. Watson's idea for the Little Albert experiment stemmed from Ivan Pavlov. Initially, Pavlov performed classical conditioning on dogs. Watson took this one step further by using infants. He performed this experiment with a graduate student named Rosalie Rayner. The goal of Watson's experiment was to teach the baby how to fear. That being, he decided to condition little Albert into fearing a white rat. The infant used in the experiment was an orphan. He was said to be between 9 to 11 months old at the time of the experiment. However, little Albert was exposed to numerous stimuli, which include a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, mass, and burning newspapers. After showing little Albert these stimuli, he made no reaction. Next, Watson took a step further by creating a loud noise when he showed the baby the rat. He hit a metal pipe with a hammer every time he exposed the baby to the rat. The baby cried initially because of the loud noise. Watson performed this repeatedly. The baby cried every time. After numerous attempts, the baby would cry in fear of just seeing the rat. Watson had successfully conditioned little Albert into being afraid of a rat. Out of fear, little Albert tried to take himself as far away from the rat as possible. Watson and Rayner continued to study this experiment for years after. This experiment brought about numerous ethical issues. At the time of the experiment in the 1920s, there didn't seem to be any ethical issues. However, today this would not be conducted. Many people wondered what happened to little Albert after the experiment. It took 7 years to find him. It was discovered that his name is actually Douglas Merritt. Little Albert died when he was only 6 years old due to hydrocephalus. Watson and Rayner had reported that little Albert was a healthy baby. Some people have theorized that they actually knew about little Albert's disease but continued on with the experiment anyways. Years later, there was a theory that Douglas was not actually little Albert. There was a boy named William Barger born in the same hospital on the same day as Douglas, who also went by Albert. However, Watson had more work than the Little Albert experiment. In 1919, his work was displayed in Psychology from the Standpoint of a Behaviorist. In this work, he discussed comparative psychology and how important conditioning is in research. Just 1 year later, Watson and his wife divorced, which ended his career in psychology. Shortly after, he started a career in advertising. He retired in 1946 and passed away about 10 years after that. Although Watson's career in research had ended, I have learned from business classes that there's plenty of psychology used in advertising. It is probable that this is why Watson ended up in advertising. Obviously, Watson played a huge role in psychology. Along with Pavlov, he was able to make remarkable discoveries in behaviorism. You will probably best remember him for his role in the Little Albert experiment. Also, it is important to remember that he is one of our pioneering psychologists, especially when it comes to behaviorism.